Hey now, welcome to another edition of the Inside BS Show. I'm your host, Dave Lorenzo, and today we have a really interesting and enlightening conversation, and you're going to have homework after the show. That's right, you the listener, you the viewer, you're going to have homework after this show, so you got to stay with us all the way to the end because you want to make sure you can do your homework adequately. My guest today is Theresa Clancy, and she's an estate planning attorney, and she's got a really interesting story, and I think that story is going to help make things really clear for you about what you need to do and why you need to do it, and the homework that we're going to share with you today. So I appreciate you being here. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Inside BS Show. Terry, welcome to the show. So your proper name is Theresa Clancy, but on everything you sent me, you said, call me Terry, so I'm taking the liberty of calling you Terry.
That's great. Yeah, and thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
So I read your story on your website. Please share it with our audience and talk about how that kind of made you think a little bit differently about planning for your future.
Yeah, so I have been an attorney for a long time, but most of my career was spent at the prosecutor's office. So I don't know, about 4 years ago, I was doing something different and trying to figure out what I could do. And the one thing people kept asking me if I, was able to do their will. And my husband and I didn't have wills, and we're both attorneys. Well, actually, he's a judge. And, we have 4 kids, we have a house, we're not millionaires or anything like that, but, we have enough to protect, right? And we didn't really know much about the process. All we knew was what a lot of people know is like, well, you should have a will if you have kids and, something to protect. So, I started looking into it, started working on doing our estate plan. I had drafted some documents and was working on a friend's. And my husband was in great health at the time. Like, he literally had biked 20 miles the day this happened. He had run he'd biked 50 miles the day this happened, 10 miles before. I mean, he was the picture of health. And 11:30 at night, I had gone to bed first, and I wake up to what I thought was him snoring. But it turned out that when I, tried to wake him up to, have him roll over, he didn't respond. And it was a really weird snoring sound. So I said, that is really, really weird. I got up out of bed. I kind of came around his side of the bed to really wake him, and still no response. So, right away, I'm like, this is not right. So I right away called an ambulance, and they keep you on the phone, and they're like, okay, you have to do CPR. I'm like, okay. And you need to take your husband off the bed and get him on a hard surface. And I said, well, he's like almost 200 pounds. How am I going to do that? And he's, unconscious. And they're like, you just have to pull him off the bed. So I pull him off the bed. I let him drop. And then I start performing CPR on him. Meanwhile, our teenager kids are kind of filtering into the room, seeing their mom perform CPR on their dad. And an ambulance is on the way, and I could, see where it was coming from. But unfortunately, it stopped at a neighbor's house instead of our house, which, as you can imagine, every minute seems to count in these kinds of scenarios. So, I was on the call with the 911 person. I'm like, you're at the wrong house. You're at the wrong house. So then they finally get here, and they get up to our bedroom, and, they take over. But at this time, he flatlines. And so they bring out the paddles to jump his heart back to. And luckily they do get a pulse. And then they have, take this 200-pound man down like we have an old house, kind of a narrow staircase, and off to the hospital he goes. And we have no idea. He's never regained consciousness through all this. We have no idea how long he'd been unconscious since I'd gone to bed first. And so we wind up at the hospital, and the very first thing they ask me is if he has healthcare directives. And embarrassingly, in front of all my kids, I have to say, no, he doesn't. And, I have to make these decisions that you'd normally make for yourself ahead of time in the healthcare directive, have to make it for him, just guessing what I think he'd want. And so, luckily they were able to find the blockage. They performed angioplasty surgery, but it still remained how much oxygen had been deprived, and didn't know if he was going to regain consciousness or be a vegetable the rest of his life. I mean, it was kind of touch and go. He was in, the ICU for a few days, and there were times throughout that time that, his he was, having AFib, which is you have to take out the paddles again. I mean, it was it was awful. And the thing that kept going through my mind is like, oh my God, like I don't have access to some of his accounts, right? And I mean, obviously I was going through like, oh my God, what would happen if he died? But I knew what would happen because I had started doing all this stuff and knew like things could be really bad. I could inherit all of his accounts with my kids. I could be owning my house with my kids if it wasn't set up correctly. And so that made me kind of a true believer about doing estate planning, where it really is the difference between having a couple of documents and not going to court, and not having those documents and having to go to court. So that's the backstory.
Wow. So thank you for sharing that with us. Is he back to full health now? He's okay now?
Yeah. So because he was in such good shape prior to the heart attack, he never had to do rehab, which is pretty unusual for most heart patients. And yeah, he's back to running, biking, like he bikes 90 miles in one day on a weekend. So he's still in really good shape. I think, just sometimes stress catches up with somebody. He also had not been to the doctor on a regular basis. So they might have found out that he had high cholesterol. We'll never know if prior to that time he had high cholesterol. But so, it's another suggestion besides getting your estate plan done is to, check in regularly with your physician.
And how old was he when this happened?
He was 57. So he was a young man.
He's a young guy. Yeah. So, all right. Well, one of the reasons why I wanted Terry to tell that story is because you are no different. I'm talking to you now, the people who are listening, the people who are watching, you are no different than Terry or than me, right? It's going to take a life event for you to get your documents together. And until that life event happens, you're going to be the happy wanderer just going through life thinking everything is fine. And then on that one day, the people you care about the most are either going to have to make some terrible decisions, some really difficult decisions, or they're going to need to know where stuff is and it's not written out, or they're going to need to know how to take care of the stuff you have if you're not around, or they're going to have to fight to get back the stuff they already have going through the probate process. So, in fact, Terry, this is a good place to start. Explain to people what the probate process is. You're an Illinois attorney, and on all these shows when I interview attorneys, we put a little disclaimer. Terry's not giving you legal advice, right? You need to go see your own attorney for legal advice, but she's educating us on what's going on in the world in her practice areas. So, Terry, what is the probate process, and how does it work, and why should people be aware of it?
Well, I think the biggest misconception about probate is that a will keep you out of it, which really doesn't matter. I mean, it's good to have a will because it gets your stuff to who you want to go to, and you are able to put somebody in charge of gathering that stuff and distributing it. But whether your assets have to go through the probate process, which is a court process to distribute your assets, depends on what assets you own at your death rather than whether you own a will or not. And in Illinois, there are two different types of assets that will trigger probate court. One is any real estate held in your name individually. So if you own your property with a spouse or a partner, you're likely having it set up so you would automatically inherit the property from each other. But if something happened to the both of you, or God forbid, your deed doesn't have that scenario on it, which is called joint tenancy or tenancy by the entirety, or of course, if you own your property alone, then in order to move the property from your name, who's now a deceased person, into the name of a living person, you will have to go through the probate process to get there, likely. And then the other triggering asset is any assets in aggregate, so altogether, that aren't beneficiary designated, which usually excludes, 401ks and IRAs and life insurance, but typically includes stock accounts, businesses, bank accounts, savings accounts, all of that in aggregate, if it's more than $100,000, that'll trigger probate court.
And is there a planning process you can put in place to avoid that? Because I would imagine going through probate it's got to be expensive, right?
It's expensive. It delays distribution by at least 6 months, but I think a lot of attorneys will say that it could be up to a year. And during the pandemic, it was even longer. And then if, of course, it's public, so everybody knows about it. And it's just an added layer. It's not going to take the place of your person who's gathering your stuff and distributing it. It's now they have an additional layer of dealing with an attorney and dealing with the court system to add to all of that other stuff. So there are a couple ways you can do it. If you don't own any real estate and you just have, bank accounts, stock accounts, you usually can find some way to beneficiary designate all of those accounts, maybe not a business. But the problem with doing that is if you have younger kids, they would inherit everything, at least in Illinois, at 18. So that might not be the best solution. And, that also is, if you have 6 people that you want to inherit and they all, inherit like a business together, although that's pretty unlikely scenario, but, so who's in charge kind of thing. If you have beneficiary designations on things, sometimes that becomes a problem. So what I usually suggest to people if they own any real estate or if they have young kids is to create what's called a revocable trust. And it's also known as a living trust. And it is a pretty easy thing to set up when you're working with an attorney. They will do a lot of the work for you. You're just making decisions and giving, information. And then once it's set up, then it'll kind of encase your assets, kind of like an empty box. You'll put your assets into the box by retitling them, and then the trust document guides those assets rather than probate court.
And so in a living trust, does that have to have a separate bank account and be fully funded as if as I know in the case of my parents who are at an advanced age now, their assets are in an irrevocable trust that my sister and I control, we manage. And that had to be obviously fully funded, and it acts as a separate entity. Is a living trust the same thing?
No, a living trust is a revocable trust.
Right, but does it have to have a bank account and a separate is a completely separate entity or no?
It is a separate entity, but it is not nearly as complicated and as restrictive as an irrevocable trust is.
Okay.
During your lifetime, if you're the one setting up the trust, you're the trustee. You don't have to have somebody come in and manage things for you, and you're the beneficiary. So, and it's your social security number that is the trust number. So it's not real complicated as far as that is concerned. And really, it's not complicated to get funded. Largely, the attorney will typically do the deed for you as far as your real estate is concerned. And then a lot of times with other assets, you usually have a digital presence. Sometimes you'll have a financial advisor who will help you get those things set up. And it really isn't nearly as complicated as it once was when we were not in a digital world.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that's all really good advice that people should take advantage of. What life events typically will trigger these types of conversations? Because I know that I've had these conversations with friends and family members when they get married, the birth of a child, that sort of thing. Is there any time that's better than another time to bring up planning for, these types of scenarios?
Well, in my opinion, everyone should start when they're 18. And you should have at least a power of attorney healthcare that lets you name someone to make medical decisions for you at an incapacity, so like a parent. And then as you go through life and life events start occurring, you start kind of filling out your estate plan in a sense. So yes, if you have a child, you should have a will, because that is where, at least in Illinois, that is where you'd put the guardianship designations. If something were to happen to, the parents, then this would be somebody who would step in that role. And I think not doing that is putting a lot of stress on a family, because you're the one who knows your kids best. You're the one who knows who would be the best parent for your kids. And now they have to do a guessing game of who they think would be best. And perhaps there's even, infighting about that. And, they would have just followed whoever you suggested. So it's just so much easier for you to set that up than for them to get into that role and try to do a guessing game of who would be the best person, and then the guilt game of, oh, it didn't work out so well, the kid didn't turn out the way we thought they would, and maybe that whole guessing game was, a bad, we chose the wrong person, essentially.
Yeah, so Terry, I'm going to ask you now to think really hard about some of the questions you ask your clients when they come in that most people wouldn't think of. Right? Because your role is to turn over all the rocks, right? Your role is to figure, you have seen all the scenarios, the possible scenarios for, what could happen to people. So your job is to help people plan for the things they didn't think about. I want you to think about the questions that you ask people where they sit back and they go, wow, I'm so glad I'm here, and I'm so glad you asked me that because I would have never thought of that. And before you answer those questions, I need to let people know that our show today is brought to you by Sandrowski Corporate Advisors. Since 1983, Sandrowski Corporate Advisors has provided expert client service to folks all over the United States. Now, they have offices in Detroit and Chicago, but they work everywhere. In fact, I just referred them to someone in New York City. I referred them a few weeks ago to folks out in California. And if you're wondering who I'm referring Sandrowski Corporate Advisors to, well, they do a lot of things in the area of accounting, and two of the things they do, and two of the things that I refer them for all the time, are forensic accounting, and I refer them out business valuations all the time. Now, why do I refer these things to them? Well, because they've been doing it for so long and they have so much experience. So forensic accounting comes into play where, let's say you have, in fact, this was the case that I connected them with just recently. You have two partners, and the partners are in the process of breaking up the business. And the one partner is not so sure that the partner who controlled the books in the business was really playing it straight. So we brought Sandrowski in to look at the books to make sure that everything was on the up and up. So they're in the process of doing that now. We also bring Sandrowski in all the time. I introduce them to family law attorneys with whom I work and family law attorneys that I know, and they do business valuations. So if there's a business that is at issue in a contentious divorce and the one spouse says the business is worth X and the other spouse says the business is worth Y, you need somebody to come in and really truly value the business and testify to that value in court if necessary. Sandrowski's perfect for this. They've been doing that for years and years and years. So if you are an attorney and you have contentious litigation that involves accounting, or you have litigation that you need a forensic review of, or you need a good business valuation, give Sandrowski Corporate Advisors a call. You can reach them at 866-717-1607, 866-717-1607. We're also brought to you by my Revenue Roadmap Guide. I want to give you a gift to thank you for watching, to thank you for listening. That gift is a business development plan. If you're a professional or you're in a business that relies on relationships for the bulk of your revenue, my Revenue Roadmap Guide will help you grow your business quickly, and it's absolutely free. Just go to revenueroadmapguide.com. Enter your contact info there, and you can download the guide for free and customize it. This is the same guide I go through with my clients to help them grow their businesses. It's my gift to you to thank you for watching, to thank you for listening to the show. RevenueRoadmapGuide.com. Enter your contact info there. My guest today is Theresa Clancy. Theresa Clancy Law is the name of her firm. You can call her at 708-819-1580, 708-819-1580. She's already given us some really good thoughts on how to organize our estate plan, how to plan for the future. Now, Terry, before I just read those pieces there, I asked you, what are the questions that just knock people out of their socks when they come into your office and they go, Terry, I'm so glad you asked me that. I'm really glad I'm here. What questions do you ask that people should be asking themselves?
Well, I mean, who's going to go in the seats, right? So if you have a spouse or a partner, typically that's the person who's going to be backing you up if something happens to you. But then who's backing that person up? And it doesn't have to be the same person for financial and healthcare and guardian. They can be three different sets of people, and and if they are a person who is for like financial, who is older, sometimes younger people choose their parents. Well, maybe it's a good idea to back up a parent. And I know that sounds like, a lot of backups, but you never, things happen in life. And so it's kind of good to have it already set up than to have to go back and amend the documents to change things. And then for healthcare, I like people to have somebody backing them up, even if it's a double backup that's within driving distance of wherever they're living, because you kind of want somebody boots on the ground if something were to happen to, and you and your spouse or partner travel around together. So that's a scenario that does happen to people. And it's kind of nice to have somebody there talking to the healthcare team, even if they're, not the person that you would initially want to make all the decisions, at least there's somebody there. And then I think a lot of people think of guardian and they go blank. That's why a lot of times they don't even do estate planning because they just can't make a decision. And my suggestion to them is just to plan for the next 3 to 5 years. Who would be the best guardian right now? You could drive yourself crazy thinking about my child's 3. Who would be the best guardian at 16? You just can't go there because you'll never get anything accomplished. So if you just think of 3 to 5 years, who would be the best guardian, and then name that person, maybe name a backup, and you can always change it. If that's great, let it ride. If it's not, change it in, 3 to 5 years. So those are some, and then the one thing that, is kind of far-fetched, but we still always plan for it, is if something catastrophic happened to all of you and all of your children all at the same time with the partner, who would benefit from your assets in that scenario. But, that's not something that's too worrisome.
Yeah. Terry, really quick, while you were going through those, I thought of two family members that are really important to me, really important to my family, and they're a same-sex couple. They're married. They're in New Jersey. How is estate planning for same-sex couples different? Is it different in Illinois from planning for traditional or heterosexual couples?
Well, I mean, if they're married, it's absolutely not different. And if they have if they have some kind of legal partnership, it's also not different. And then it would just be kind of similar to somebody who was not married but heterosexual. You still can do some planning. In our country, there's always a benefit to making things legal, and that's true in estate planning as well. But you still can do the estate planning to get things set up, because unfortunately, the way the law works is if you don't have a plan, it has a plan for you as far as distribution of your assets to people that, are related to you. And so if that person is not related to you legally, they would be out of the picture essentially. So you would, in that case, if you had a partner, regardless of your sexuality, and they're not planned for in your estate plan and they're not legally bound to you, they might essentially be disinherited. And, nobody wants that. So,
yeah, so it makes sense. This is important for everybody, regardless of your, where you are, who you love, what your life is, what you're going through in your life. You need to take care of this now. All right. So, Terry, tell me a little bit about what is the birthday book, and what's the power club? I've heard you mention that. What are these things, and what should we know about them?
So as I said, I am a kind of estate planning true believer. I believe you should start your estate plan, essentially having one document at 18, which is a power of attorney, healthcare, allowing somebody to make medical decisions for you at your incapacity. And as healthcare laws tighten, especially, in the States, it is harder and harder to get access to information of those you love, including your children. So, if anyone has a child who's turned 18, it's like the door shuts on access to any of their healthcare information, and it is really difficult to get access to it if you're not having a release from that child. And I suppose there is emergency situations. If you're there and the physician can see who you are and you can identify yourself, they will automatically give you that information as next of kin. But if you're calling on the telephone and you can't identify yourself and they don't know who you are, I think a lot of healthcare teams would would, defer to their best interest over whatever you say, because they don't know who you are. And maybe you're, a person who is not entitled to any of that information. So the Birthday Book and Power Club is about getting a healthcare power of attorney to an 18-year-old when they turn 18. So you would turn 18 and you would typically be a senior in high school. And it kind of is about adulting, right? Because a lot of kids are really worried about getting into the adult world. And this would be a way for them to have the opportunity to do a power of attorney healthcare document, learn some information about adulting from a alum from high school who's, maybe 3 or 4 years older than you, and then also getting a book that would be about adulting. So it'd be kind of a party for the 18-year-olds in the month in which they're turning 18, encouraging them to embrace adulthood, essentially, instead of shy away from it. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic and the construction at the high school in my neighborhood, we have had many stop and starts to this program, so it hasn't actually come to fruition. But I have every intention of continuing to pursue it next year so that it can come to fruition.
Ah, that's so great. I mean, I think it's a great idea. I appreciate you doing it, and I'm sure the other parents appreciate you doing it. That's wonderful. Now, talk a little bit about this subject. Is a lot of people tell me it's very difficult for people to bring up. I don't find it to be difficult because I everything for me is about a story, and I tell a story from my own family where, unfortunately, my grandfather, as he advanced in years, he had a medical event and he was unable to communicate his wishes, and my mother and my aunt, her sister, had conflicting views as to what his wishes would be, and it was a very difficult time for them and for our family. That's when my parents put their wishes down, and that's when they took this process very, very seriously. I tell that story to get into a conversation with people about why they should do these things. How do you coach people to? You just gave us a great example with high school kids at age 18. But how do we? So we have people we love, we have people we care about who are new parents, or we have people we love, people we care about who have just gotten married. How do we bring up their death and get them to talk about their death when they're going through a very happy time in their lives?
Yeah, you know what? I want people to think about estate planning as, like getting insurance for your home. So you buy homeowners insurance, literally the day you take possession of a home, but you don't worry the next day that it's going to catch on fire. And I think that if you get these, the plan in place and you create some of these documents to be insurance in a sense for you, now they're there, you can stop worrying about things and just live your life. And I think that people, are anticipating the worry of this, which if you just took action, it would be behind you, not always on your to-do list. And so I think telling my story, telling other client stories of how things can go totally sideways is one way to encourage them to do it. But I think the other is just almost telling them how easy it's going to be, how, it's not going to take nearly as much work to set up, that, you're going to feel a lot more confident and happy when you're done. The one thing that all of my clients have ever said, it's been on the to-do list, and the one thing they've said when they're done is, oh, that was a lot easier than I thought it would be.
Well, yeah, because you're doing all the work, Terry. That's why it's easy for the clients.
Yeah, and it's fun. I mean, I love this stuff. I love learning about people's lives. I mean, we talk a lot more, I think, about people's lives than we do about their death, which is kind of fun.
And that's the real moral of the story here, is that this is about your life, and that you raise that raises an interesting point. Talk a little bit for me about the asset protection, for lack of a better word, angle on estate planning, right? Some of the things you do for people to help them also protects their assets in the event of a lawsuit, or somebody who's coming after them for some reason. Explain what I'm talking about to people a little bit, if you don't mind.
I mean, yes, there is asset protection. You can put, and I think more people think about it more as having protection from having to pay estate taxes than having to worry about somebody suing them and taking their house. Because I think really some of the best asset protection in that instance is just having some good insurance. But, of course, there are situations where you're worried, especially if it looks like having a nursing home on your horizon is going to be in the picture, and then unfortunately you can't qualify for government benefits if you have too much money. So probably in that instance, like your family did, is they want to protect certain assets, but you have to do it ahead of time. Otherwise you're penalized. So, if that is on your horizon, you can start planning for that situation ahead of time so that you don't get into that trick bag of having too many assets and now not qualifying for the benefits you're hoping to get.
Sure. Now, you have you and my wife share something in common. My wife is a fantastic cook. In fact, she has something that she makes that's going to be in the South Beach Food and Wine Festival in a few weeks. She was invited to participate, so we're all really excited about that. But you, like my wife, you're a big fan of the Barefoot Contessa. So talk a little bit about some of the things that you do for fun, and talk about the Barefoot Contessa Cookoff. And are you participating in that, or have you? What's your relationship with the Barefoot Contessa?
So I love Ina Garden. She is the Barefoot Contessa. She has 14 cookbooks, I think, and I own every single one of them, and I've probably made 75% of the recipes.
Wow, good for you.
It's just so reliable because she's a scientist, so she tests out her recipes in very specific formats. Like, okay, I'm going to test both a half a teaspoon of salt and a quarter teaspoon of salt, and which one is better. So you can, rely on those recipes. So I kind of became a huge fan throughout my life and making her recipes, and I wanted to do something for her to kind of showcase all of the knowledge that I've gotten and celebrate her. And I had been watching the show Julia and Julia, which is about Julia Child and Julie Powell, who ended up making every recipe in Julia Child's French cooking book over the course of a year. So I thought, well, I don't really want to follow that exactly, but I would love to just do something for Ina. So I came up with this idea of we have this event, and we assign every single recipe from one cookbook. They're typically around 85 to 90 recipes, and each woman, because it's a woman-based event, each woman is assigned a recipe, and then they make it at home and they bring it to our party, essentially. So you have like 90 different recipes to taste, and then everyone tastes them, and then we vote on which one is best in each category. And then there are prizes based on who made that recipe. But it's a great way to kind of showcase Ina. And I have some friends who bring the cookbook with them so they can make notes on their cookbook about the recipes they like the most. But it just is a fun event.
Oh, that's terrific. I can tell that you are. You must be a terrific cook, because the attention to detail and just that description alone, and the fact that you are a fan of the Barefoot Contessa because the recipes are proven and they work. That tells me a lot about you. It says a lot about you as an attorney too, that you have specific focus and attention to detail in your practice because you care so much. And it's the same thing with your cooking. So that's excellent. That's fantastic. I'm actually, that was a really great story. I'm glad you told it. Thank you. So talk to us a little bit now about any concerns that you see on the horizon. I hear, I almost hesitate to bring this up because it's almost like a political can of worms, but the estate tax is something that I hear brought up by people all the time, and most people don't really. First of all, they don't know what it is. Second of all, there are state-specific estate taxes, and it's most people who worry about this, it's never going to be triggered in their case. Explain to people who are listening today what the estate tax is and who needs to worry about it and who doesn't need to be concerned about it.
Well, there's two different sets of estate tax, at least in Illinois. The one federal and then Illinois state estate tax. So federally, the limit now is, I think, $12 million a person. They just jumped because of inflation. And most people don't have to worry about that, because not only do you have your 12 million, you have your spouse's 12 million, and you can take their 12 million. So now you have 24 million if you're married, 12 million if you're not. And that's just not the reality for most people. And the Illinois estate tax is $4 million a person, and unfortunately, you can't borrow your spouses as easily as you can the federal. So you kind of have to plan for them using their exemption. I mean, it still is not a worry for many people, especially if you are, on the other side of 50 years old and you already know how much money you have, and you're more worried about drawing your money down than building your money up. But it is a worry for younger people whose 401ks have, gone kind of through the roof these last couple of years, and they could see the potential of hitting those thresholds. And, there certainly are people who are over 50 who are worried about it as well. And I think the best way to do is just to plan for it, make some decisions about how you're going to address it if that is what happens at your death. Of course, we never know how much we're going to own at our death, but I think for the vast majority of people, it really isn't a worry. It's maybe a worry that is possible but not likely. And so that is something that people think about when they do their estate planning, but more they're worried about getting things set up so that it's easy for who's going to handle stuff when they're gone.
All right. Thanks for the explanation. I appreciate it. So all of you who are out there and you worry about this issue and you vote on this issue, federally, 24 million. If you're in Illinois, it's 4 million. And if you're worried about the 4 million, go see Terry, and Terry and a good financial advisor, and they'll help you work it out. They'll help you plan for not giving the government one penny more than you absolutely positively have to. All right, Terry, I'm going to ask you to do something for me now. I'm going to ask you to think of three things you want people to take away from our time together today. They could be personal, they could be work-related, but three things that you think are the most important things that we raised during the show. And while you're thinking of that, I'm going to once again remind everyone that we are brought to you by Sandrowski Corporate Advisors. They're a sponsor of the show. They help me and they help my clients prepare for what could potentially be a difficult situation with our business. So let's say you're going to sell your business and you're going to get walloped with taxes when you sell your business. Well, if you call Sandrowski Corporate Advisors, they can do an analysis and determine if your business is structured appropriately so that you can minimize your tax exposure upon a sale. There's a specific access that you have specific access to a law for qualified small businesses that can reduce your tax exposure. But here's the thing, it does require advanced planning. In most cases, it requires at least 5 years of advanced planning for you to structure your business in a way that will minimize your tax exposure when you go to sell it. Is your business eligible for this? Could you be in an industry that could help with this process? Yes, but you need to call Sandrowski in order to find out. I want you to call 866-717-1607, 866-717-1607. Reach out to them and say, hey, listen, I'm thinking about selling my business down the road, and I heard Dave Lorenzo talk about the qualified small business exemption. Can you look at my business and see if I'm eligible? Sandrowski, they're experts in this. They've been doing this for a long time. They've helped people save, I can't even tell you, millions and millions of dollars. And they can help you as well. 866-717-1607. Also remember, the Revenue Roadmap Guide, my free gift to you. I want you to download your copy right now, revenueroadmapguide.com. It's a business development plan for you, and it's absolutely free. It's the same plan I use with my clients. All you need to do is go to revenueroadmapguide.com, enter your contact info. You can download the guide right there. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for viewing the show. All right, Terry, what are the three big things that people should take away from our time together today?
Well, I think one, if estate planning is on your to-do list, you are going to feel great to get it checked off, and it's going to likely be a lot easier and less expensive than you are thinking it will be. So get going. Number 2 is that if it's not on your to-do list, do a little investigating, because frankly, you can get things set up right now without even entering into an estate plan that will make life easier on the people who you leave behind. And maybe you'll eventually move into the estate plan to-do list threshold. But for right now, just do a little investigation. You can get things set up so that you can make it a little easier on people who you leave behind. And then lastly is, if you have never tried a Barefoot Contessa cookbook recipe, you should, because I would say almost every single recipe will turn out great, and you'll be happy that you did.
Oh, Theresa Clancy Law, it has been a pleasure. If you want more great information, if you want actual legal advice from Terry Clancy, here's the number you need to call: 708-819-1580. 708-819-1580. We're going to put all of her contact info. If you're an email person, I'll put her email. Everything will be down in the show notes. I'll put her website down in the show notes. You can see her beautiful family. She's got a great picture of her family there. Terry, it has been an absolute pleasure. You gave us so much knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I was happy to be here.
Terry, thank you so much. And that'll do it for another episode of the Inside BS Show, folks. Thanks for joining us today. We're back here again tomorrow with another great interview for you. Until then, I'm Dave Lorenzo, and here's hoping you make a great living and live a great life.